joy to be here with everyone this evening and just to share these very exciting and very sacred teachings of Kriya Yoga with everyone at this center that shares and teaches Kriya Yoga. So I think we'll begin with a prayer and a chant, and then I think Michael or someone will introduce me. And I'll just talk about the book, and this is less about a book, but about the inspiration behind it and what we can learn from it. So let's begin with a prayer, as we always do to our line of gurus here. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, beloved God,
Friend, beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswarji,
Swami Shri Yukteswarji,
beloved Guru,
beloved Guru,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
we humbly bow at thy feet.
we humbly bow at thy feet.
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
we are all your children.
we are all your children.
Guide our lives,
Guide our lives,
let our hearts be open
let our hearts be open
to your grace,
to your grace,
to your love,
to your love,
to your bliss.
to your bliss.
Help us all to be instruments,
Help us all to be instruments,
sharing that grace
sharing that grace
with all whom we meet.
with all whom we meet.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This is just a traditional invocation to God and the Gurus that is often done, chanted in India before a ceremony or a talk or a meditation. We'll just do this. You can listen. You can also sing along if you know the words. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat. Let's meditate for just a few minutes. Offering the love of our heart, offering it and feeling it rising upwards to the point between the eyebrows. Again, joy to be here.
Should I introduce you? Well, I think a lot of you know Nayaswami Devarshi, but it is my joy to introduce him to those of you who don't know him. Nayaswami Devarshi has made Ananda his life from a very young age. He found Swami Kriyananda in his early 20s and has been since then with Swami Kriyananda, who's the founder of Ananda, has been trained closely through Swamiji. And then I found him leading the Kriya work in the village, and this was about 20 years back. And then he moved to India, and today he heads not only that work there, but he heads the whole of Kriya worldwide. And he also leads a monastery. So Ananda really didn't have a formal monastery, and I think we are at that edge that a monastery is not only forming, but it's very well formed and expanding, as we were hearing stories from him. So this group of monks, which seems to be great, more and more monks are coming and joining. And then another great thing that's happening is in the northern part of India, the monastery is being built, and so the land has been purchased and the plans are in place, and by God's and Guru's grace, there will be a monastery, a self-sustaining farm, so to speak, where the monks will be living the simple life and the high-thinking life that Master always talked about. So, and then of course, the most recent, we are all excited about this new book that has come out. We all feel it's going to be a very important book for the future. And today he's going to share his inspiration.
Okay, thank you, Ananda. I'll add that when I took over the Kriya Sangha, and at that time preparing and training people for initiation into Kriya Yoga, the first batch, for me it was very exciting to have the first batch of Kriya students coming to Ananda, and it was a whole weekend program. And Padma not only was in that batch, but she was the first student I saw. It was just, there was something very auspicious about that. I remember the exact moment, seeing her across the forest at the old Ananda meditation retreat. I was very excited. This was the beginning. I knew of something that I would be spending, well, as it turned out, decades doing. So I just appreciate seeing her again, and we've been friends since that time. I'll also talk about the monastery towards the end, but first to talk about the book here, which is this book here. There's copies out there in the entryway boutique area. And this is Kriya Yoga, Spiritual Awakening for the New Age. And Kriya Yoga, I mean, the word Kriya now has become common, but when Paramahansa Yogananda brought Kriya Yoga to the West, there was only one Kriya Yoga. Now a lot of people are using the name, but it's a simple word. Kriya simply means action. And Swami Kriyananda talked about it's a very simple practice, it's a simple technique, but really it's a very specific technique. If you've read, as everyone here, or most people read Autobiography of a Yogi, and in that book, Paramahansa Yogananda talks about how this practice of Kriya Yoga has been around since time immemorial, that he even said this technique was taught by Christ to his disciples, who had a very inward mystical life, Krishna to his disciples. And the reason why it's been around all this time, because nowadays in America, if it's not new and approved, it's like, well, why am I even doing something like this? That's so old. I mean, it's certainly gotten better by now. But it works with very central human realities. And so it's way, way more than a technique or a practice. It's really a whole way of life. And the book doesn't talk about the technique. It talks about how to get more from the practice of the technique for those who learn it. But the technique is so simple. But what it does is it helps us work with the inner life force, the energy in our astral bodies, our astral spines. And by helping us work with that energy and learning how to work with it, it gives us control over that inner energy. And this control in yoga, science, again for thousands of years, is called pranayama. And in modern times, the word pranayama has sort of been changed to talk about breathing exercises and practices. It also means that. But what it really meant originally, and in the deeper sense, it means having control of the life force. Paramahansa Yogananda, Swami Kriyananda, they said pranayama is a condition, it's not just a technique. But a technique that works with that energy gives us control over the inner energy. And when we have control over the inner energy, we can learn how to have control of our lives, our thoughts, our emotions. So most of this book talks about the inner understanding of gaining control over that life force, and then the application of that in our daily lives. And so what Kriya Yoga does is a little bit like learning finger exercises on a piano. It's a practice that we do every day, morning and evening, twice a day. And I've been doing it morning and evening for 44 years, I think it is, or 45 years now, or 46, I think. It just it adds up fast. It goes by very fast. And it's like working with the finger exercises, morning and evening. You think, well, why do you have to do it? You still have to do it twice a day after 6 years. But what it does is it's just like playing a musical instrument. If you master the control over your fingers, and this is a mundane kind of example or analogy, but when you master control over the inner energy, then you have control over everything, just in your life. And I'm not exaggerating by that. There's a chant that's written, shared in the book, that was sung by Yogananda's guru, Sri Yukteswar, about pranayama, control of the life force. And it talks about the fruits of Kriya Yoga practice. And essentially this book is about not just the fruits, but how to use that control to deal with grief, with loss, with chronic pain, with emotions, with people, with our lives in every way. So this is where you see that Kriya Yoga is a whole approach to life. And the technique is just one part of it that works with giving us that control. But far more important is how we use it, because we all want change. We all want to change our lives. And so this chant, which Yogananda said whoever wrote this chant was taking poetic license, but it describes the fruits of pranayama, control over this inner energy. And the words of the chant are, pranayama be thy religion. Pranayama will give thee salvation. Pranayama is the wishing tree. It will give you everything you wish for. Pranayama is beloved God. Pranayama is Creator Lord. That's where Yogananda said, oh, this poet was taking poetic license. But essentially what it was saying, though, was that if we have that inner control, we can know God, we can find God, we can meditate. Because even restless thoughts, I mean, how many people here, besides me, maybe I'm the only one that gets restless thoughts sometimes when we meditate. It's hard to overcome that. And thoughts is just an energy. It's just an energy flowing through us that we don't have control over. Emotions. Imagine having control over our emotions rather than our emotions controlling us. And I'll talk in a bit about something that Yogananda called the reactive process, which really, this reactive process gets to the heart of how we become happy and joyful under all circumstances, how we respond to life, to the curveballs and the tricks that life throws at us, because this life is very tricky. We think, oh, I got it. I'm on the right track now, and we go out the door and we get in a car accident and we just have a trouble with our body, or a pandemic comes. Oh my God, everything was just going so smoothly, and all of a sudden isolation, and this world is going crazy, and economy and all these things. And so we can react to such things in our lives from a place of emotional reactivity, or we can respond from a place of calmness and clarity of mind. And when the heart's feelings are calm, the great exponent of yoga, Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, which are really the great treatise of yoga, which is really yoga meaning union with God, and what yoga postures are part of that, but it's more about meditation and this inner life that we're talking about. But the very second sutra, he defines yoga, which is union with God. Yoga means union. Yogas citta vritti nirod, which is yoga is the calming or the neutralizing of the agitated feelings of the heart, the emotions of the heart. And when we can calm those emotional feelings, and we don't deaden them, we just calm them, and then we uplift that calm heart energy upwards to the point between the eyebrows, which this describes the path of meditation and how we work with that inner energy. then so many things come out of that. And so agitated feelings of the heart, when they're calmed and also uplifted, we start to see things more clearly. Because emotions really cloud the mind. And I think we've all seen this when we're in a really emotional, reactive, upset state. Boy, I think they call it seeing red. You know, it's just like, it just clouds everything. And it's kind of like Yogananda talked about a lake at night. And when there's a lot of wind and there's a lot of waves on the lake, the moon that's up above the lake, you just see all these flashes of light and it's all disturbed. But when the waves are calmed, then the perfect reflection of the moon is seen in that lake. And so when those waves are calmed, then we start to see life clearly, because it's not just a bunch of craziness, it's a bunch of clarity and understanding with life. And then we understand how to work with things in our life. And this is not just a mechanical thing where, you know, Swami Kriyananda would often say that Kriya, the practice of the technique, is not mechanical in the results that it gives. It also works with intuition, with intuitive understanding, which means perception from this calm heart center. And that awareness gets us into an intuitive understanding of life and how to work with people, because it's not mechanical. I mean, so much of life, you can't look it up in the back of the index of the book. Okay, this person just, you know, yelled at me. What am I supposed to do? This person who's my husband or wife just yelled at me. And it's different every time. But by learning to work with this reactive process, we don't react. And this is just one part of what we're talking about. We don't react emotionally. And you see this when there's an argument. It's kind of like two people hitting a ping pong ball back and forth. And one person slams it, and the other one, there's a lot of energy coming at you and even more speed, so you can slam it even harder back. And it's all about action and reaction. And arguments are like this a lot. And just to sort of take this analogy further, if we are working with this calm center of the heart in this reactive process, the next time that person slams it across at us, we just, okay, I'm not going to react by slamming it even harder. You catch the ball and you take a few deep breaths, and then you give the ball to the person, and just with kindness and with love, or you find the appropriate thing to say because you're not seeing red. Those ripples on the lake are calm and you can see clearly. But again, this comes from an intuitive sense and an intuitive awareness, which I'll talk a little bit more about. This reactive process also shows us that the things that happen to us in life are not really the cause of our happiness or our sadness. We think they are. And it's hard to actually imagine the truth of that statement unless you've really practiced it and experienced it. But Swami Kriyananda used an analogy of this, which is very enlightening in a way. And the analogy he says, imagine you buy the lottery tickets every week for years. Your goal in life is to win the lottery and have all your problems solved and win $10 million. And so one day you go to the newspaper like you've done hundreds of times before, and all the 6 numbers or how many there are now match up perfectly. And it's like, you've won, your life has changed, you've won the lottery. You take a deep breath, an inhalation, because that corresponds to this inner energy, the emotional energy when it's rising. There's more of an inhalation kind of an energy. And you're excited and you sit up straighter and you feel lighter. You almost feel like you're levitating because you feel so light, because the energy is shooting up with spurts of energy that are kind of making your brain really happy and joyful. And then you just sort of, you know, double check just to make sure. And then you see, oh, this is past week's newspaper, and this week's number. I didn't win the lottery. What happens when the energy goes down? You sigh. The breath goes down. You feel down. Even the word, I feel downcast. I feel heavy. That's talking about this energy that's going down. And it changes our state of mind. All of a sudden, we're sad. You thought all your problems were solved, and all of a sudden, $10 million has been wrenched away out of your hands, just like that, and you feel really down about it. And what happened? Nothing changed outside. Nothing changed outside of yourself. It all changed in here. And so you find that when we don't have control over the prana, the energy, our emotions, and this reactive process, then the events control us. And so an event happens and it pushes the energy down or lifts it up, and it's a roller coaster. Life is a roller coaster, and we have no control over events, our karma, and the things that happen, and stuff happens. I mean, even if you're the best person in the world, there's this expression, why do bad things happen to good people? And I mean, it's nice to think about, but bad things happen to bad people too. It just happens to everybody. The rain falls on everybody, and we can't avoid all of these things. And so controlling this reactive process shows us how to control the real cause of the happiness or the sadness, which is this energy rising or falling. And so we can learn to control the life force, the prana, which also helps us to control our moods, our emotions. And so the events, when they come to us, we understand, okay, this is just an event and it's neutral, and I have control over my energy. I don't need to respond by being depressed or sad. I can learn to be inspired and uplifted. And this doesn't mean we become dead, or it doesn't mean our emotions become dead, because we don't deaden the emotions. And sometimes yogis think this. I think sometimes yogis, they have emotional reactivity and responses, and they don't like it, and so they think the answer is to kill the emotions and deaden them. And this is essentially what self-medicating with drugs or alcohol or sleeping it off, all these things, are a way to do that, but it's energy. And so you're just killing energy and you're just suppressing it and pushing it down. But what the path of Kriya Yoga teaches is how to learn to transmute and uplift that energy and have control over it. And so when something, even when a negative thing happens, and I'll share a story. Some of you here knew my wife. We were married for 25 years, and she shared here in Torrance a few times, and we stayed with Arnab and Padma a number of times over the years. And she was a Kriya Yogi for about 30 years, and was a great Kriya Yogi. She grew up in the Soviet Union and was persecuted by this regime there, and was able to get out, and there was a lot of inner strength there. But just like anyone else, there was also fear and the anxiety that we have, and she came down with cancer and just fought it really strongly for about 10 years. And there was a fear of death, just it's one of the most innate things, and she wasn't terrified, but it was there was anxiety. But through these practices over the years, when the time came, and it did come, because she fought it and it went into remission a couple of times, but she had a extreme genetic predisposition that was very difficult to really defeat it. And all of a sudden it went into her brain, and she knew it, even though it had been completely gone for a few years. All of a sudden some weird things happening in her brain, and she knew this was it. I think this is where intuition of yogis develops, and she knew this time had come. But we had to go to the doctor and get an MRI, and she was starting to have difficulty standing even, but she was at complete peace, and not even just peaceful, but even joyful inwardly. And she told me, if the MRI doesn't show tumors in my brain, I'll eat my socks, is what she said. And there was humor, and she knew. And the doctor looked at it, and the doctor said, okay, after looking at it for a while, a few days, he said she has maybe 3 weeks to live. And I told her, and she said, that long? Really? As if to say, I'm ready to go now. And it was not in a negative way. I'm just ready to go on to the next step. There was no complaining or no negativity. There was just joy in her. There was just extraordinary peace. I didn't have so much peace in my heart. And just, in fact, as I was wheeling her in, I tell a lot of these stories in the book. I was wheeling her in on a wheelchair because she couldn't stand anymore for the MRI. And she was very inward and quiet and still, and she knew she could feel my emotional reactive process from behind, even though she wasn't seeing me. And she just said very quietly, she said, detach yourself, calm the reactive process, live the teachings. She said those 3 very pithy pieces. She was very Russian and just detach yourself, control the reactive process, live these teachings. And she was, and there was complete freedom. And when the time came, there was just so much joy and peace and even humor and lightness. It was very inspiring for me to watch. So that was her part. My part, I still had to deal with, the loss of someone who I was close to, and I've learned that all the great philosophy in the world, we have a human heart too that that loss was intense. It was very intense for a long time. But I found that through Kriya Yoga, again, working with, even offering up the grief and the pain, rather than, self-medicating or say, I'm a yogi, I'm above all these human feelings and all this, but consciously working with it, offering it up even during the practice of the Kriya Yoga technique. One of the ways that the yogis talk about Kriya Yoga, the Hari Mahashaya, one of these masters here, said it's spiritual alchemy. And what it does is, there's a chant of Yogananda's that describes the process, where he says, touch me but once and I will change all my clay into thy gold. And this is the description of turning really negative, heavy emotional feelings into gold, into an inspired and uplifted feeling. Not by suppressing, pushing it away, but by offering it up into the light, and where clay becomes gold. I joke that Yogananda wrote that chant. I think is that a Tagore chant? Touch me that. Is that from Tagore, that chant? It might be a Bengali poet who wrote that chant. But clay, I think the author was being polite by saying clay. I think he meant something a lot cruder than that. He didn't want to say it, because that's what happens. It just takes our even negative emotions, anger and hate and just grief, and just by turning the heart's energy first, again, calming agitated feeling, but sometimes it's hard to calm those agitated feelings. So even when that feeling is still agitated, you can still offer that precise, even specific feeling that's causing you so much pain, and offer it to God, offer it to the light during the practice of Kriya Yoga. Because Kriya is not a mechanical thing, it works with working with feeling. Yoga, or Swami Kriyananda, the way he put it, he said, after doing this practice for over 60 years, he said every Kriya, which is a practice that takes about 30 seconds with the breath and with the energy, every Kriya I see now should be an act of devotional self-offering. And he said everyone, it's a practice of devotion and love. It's a very sacred practice. It's not, Swami Kriyananda said that when we do it without that inner feeling of grace, of sacredness, of devotion, he says just huffing and puffing. It's just making a bunch of noises with the breath, and it doesn't do a whole lot, and it's not mechanical in giving results. But when it's done in this sacred way, then that's when that real alchemy happens. It's inwardly, it works in the same way that in India there are these ceremonies, they're called arati or puja, where you do some chanting, and you offer incense and water, and even food, sweets are offered on the altar and offered to God. And all those things are considered to be made sacred when they are offered to God. And that's an outward practice. And it's true to the extent that they are offered with true saint-like devotion and self-offering. But Kriya is this inner practice of offering even our funkiest feelings and emotions, and offering them to God in this practice, and offering them into the light. Because there's a tendency, I think, for meditators sometimes, when we stumble emotionally and we have negative thoughts and about another person, or we give into an addiction or a habit that's not good, and we're having trouble with it, to kind of turn away from God. We go into the meditation room and we see the pictures of the gurus and kind of go like this and hide, or we don't go in at all, or we don't go to the satsang or to a Sunday service. But that's, Yogananda said that Divine Mother, who we worship God usually as Divine Mother, he said that she likes it when we blame her for our faults and give her our faults. Because what that does, it means that we're going into the light of God and into the grace of God, no matter what. And we're not hiding from it. And when our littleness, when our faults, when our negative stuff is offered into that grace and into that light, it becomes sanctified, it becomes blessed, just like the food or whatever is offered on the altar becomes holy and blessed in a way. And with Kriya Yoga and with this devotional self-offering, it's our entire being that becomes sanctified and blessed. And this is how people become saints through these practices, is that day after day, morning and evening, they are offering themselves, we are offering ourselves into that light of grace, and we're changed every time we do that. And it's almost like all these things are eroded away over time, quickly or slowly, depending on our practice and how much junk we have and how sincerely we are giving it to God. But inevitably, and I can say without exception, these things, they don't just fall away. They're actually, because they are energy, negative emotions and things, it's energy. And they don't just disappear. Energy doesn't go, it doesn't get killed or anything. Energy has to find a way to express. And so these energies, they turn into something really, really great even. And just like with my wife, with just feeling this grief, it became something holy and sacred, just a divine soul, love and connection that is eternal and is very real for me to this day. And it may be more real than when she was having a human body and all the ups and downs that a relationship has and all those things. And now it's something much, much greater than that. So this is how Kriya Yoga helps us work with our own stuff especially. And when we're working with our stuff and again, calming the lake and seeing more clearly what's going on, then we can deal with things much more readily and easily and much more calmly, more clearly, with more energy. Now, energy is a central part of all this. Pranayama is control of the life force, the energy. And we're living in an age of energy. And the first chapter in the book talks about how the yogis teach that we have come out of an age of materialism, of darkness called Kali Yuga in India. And we're now in this age called Dwapara Yuga, which is the age of energy. And you see this, just everything's about energy now. Nuclear energy and electrical energy and wars over energy and energy weapons, which is scary. Yogananda, not to scare people, but this is pretty scary what he said. He said there's no security in Dwapara Yuga because people come up with these weapons of mass destruction that are more and more powerful, more and more clever all the time. And there's still a lot of people who just don't have the wisdom to responsibly have these things. And it's a challenging time, as we can see in this world. So it is an age of energy. It also means, though, that there's energy in the world more. There's energy happening. And we saw this in the pandemic. There was just waves of energy going over the planet. I live in India. I've lived in India for the last 8 years, and I was in India for the whole time of the pandemic. And there it was way, way worse than here, if you can imagine that. We all knew people who were dying, and especially during this about 3-month period in Delhi, and I was in the north, and millions died over there. The numbers have been fudged because they didn't want people to understand how many. But we were doing like a funeral ceremony, which we call an astral ascension, in Ananda. We were doing them for like 15 people at a time, every week, once a week, and this was family and friends. It wasn't all people we knew. It was family and friends, but a lot of people very close. And there was just a wave of high energy anxiety and over the planet at that time, and especially there. But it's just happening everywhere. It's like things are speeding up. I think you hear people say this, it's just things like are always speeding up. And how do you deal with that? And it's almost like this age of energy, there's more energy coming into this planet, into our consciousness, into people, in every possible way. And it's a little bit like a big wave of energy sweeping over the world. And what do you do? How do you cope with this energy? And if you don't know how to deal with it, it'll smash you and flatten you. And it's a little bit like learning how to surf a really big wave. When you learn the skill and the technique and the practice of learning how to surf, and this big wave comes, and you put out the energy to swim ahead of it, and you don't have to go as fast as it, but you have to put out energy. Then when the wave comes, you ride the wave and you just get carried along very quickly in spiritual growth terms in a way. Or if you just try to look at that way, oh, this is kind of cool. It smashes you, and that's what's happening in the world today. And a lot of people are getting smashed because they're not up to speed in a way. I have a friend who used to, you know him, Haridas, who was here for many years. When he was younger, he used to jump on trains, freight trains, and catch rides on freight trains. And yeah, but he said that when you catch a ride on a freight train, the train is moving. If you just stand still and you just jump up on the train as it's moving, it just will flatten you, just knock you off because it's not moving super fast, but you can't catch it. But you have to run next to the train for a bit and then jump up with somewhat to the same speed of the train, and then you can jump into the open door of the train. And so this is how the yogis, Yogananda talked about this as cooperating with grace. Because, we hear of divine grace, and there's this thought that grace just comes, all we have to do is born again, be saved, and God will do the whole rest of it. And there's a truth to that if you have this trust in God and offer yourself, there is some grace and some light, but it's not something that's just passive. It's an energy. And if you just do it passively, maybe you can get a little bit, but not very much. But what the yogis talk about is cooperating with that grace by putting out energy, to work with energy, to work with the life force, to consciously and actively be kind and be good, and just follow the commandments of just love thy brother and sister as yourself, and to live a good life, rather than just going to church once a week, getting blessed, and then going and being mean to everybody. Because that's not cooperating with grace. It's that passive way. And so the life of a Kriya Yogi is also putting out that kind of energy to really work with grace and act in a positive way, and run along the train to some extent the best we can. We just do it the best we can. But then when we do that with love for God and attunement to this flow of grace, which is an energy coming from the divine, then we make spiritual progress that's much, much more quick. It's very quickly hastened. And this is why Yogananda said that Kriya Yoga really hastens spiritual evolution. And it's not mechanical in the way it does that. And that's the thing. In this book, it shares a story told by Swami Kriyananda of a disciple of Yogananda, a brother disciple, who had heard that doing one Kriya was equal to a year of spiritual evolution. And that if you have it takes 1 million years of spiritual evolution to become fully liberated. So he thought, okay, I'm just going to do 1 million Kriyas and I'll be completely free. And the thing is, and the big problem is that it's not mechanical. It's one Kriya done with devotional offering and without thinking of the self and being selfish. And so he did them. He would meditate for 48 hours straight at a time, doing these thousands of these Kriyas. And finally he just gave up. He got disgusted and he told the Guru, I'm out of here. It's just, he was being asked to serve because that's part of our duty is, one of these great masters, Sri Peshwar, that wise, stern-looking one there, he said, as long as we're breathing the free air of this earth, we have the obligation to render grateful service to God, to others, and to humankind. We can't just get it all for ourselves. And Yogananda said about this man later, he had a lot of willpower. He was Swiss, and he had a lot of willpower and just determination. But he wasn't doing it with this sense of devotion and cooperating with grace. And Yogananda said these were mercenary kriyas that he was doing. It was only for himself. And this is part of what the book talks about, is that really one of the fast tracks to freedom is selflessness. And that selflessness is part of how we meditate. It's part of how we do a practice like Kriya. It's part of our service to others. And it's, to our family, to our friends. And you see this, that those who are selfish and greedy and always holding on to what they have, they are unhappy. Even just this image of holding on, what happens, your shoulders hunch and you're holding on and your heart closes, and or people protect their heart, sometimes because they've been hurt so badly in life, and which is sad, but sometimes people respond by trying to protect their heart and hide it. But the way to happiness is through giving, and by giving in meditation, in service, kindness, and love to others, our hearts open, and people are happier. You see, people who are generous tend to be happier. Children, you see this. Children who are really, really selfish, they're always crying because someone took their toy and taking care of someone else. And the child who's generous and giving and kind is happy and well balanced, and just their heart is open. And so the way to freedom is also selflessness through self-offering. That's why Swami Kriyananda said every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. And that's at the heart of it. When we do these practices with that right attitude, and in this case of devotional self-offering, it starts to kind of infect, in a good way, our whole lives. It starts to infiltrate our whole lives. And our lives it just becomes natural and easier just to be loving and giving in the way that we are with people. And that's really, this is how Kriya Yoga changes us, really from the inside out. It changes us inside during meditation. We also have to, act on it and live it outside of ourselves. But by changing our hearts, changing how we learn how to control this life force and control the reactive process, it also just starts to change the way we deal with things in the ways that we've been talking about. And so the book is really more about that. It doesn't describe techniques, talk about techniques. It's more about how these things are applied to daily life and in every way. One doesn't have to be a Kriya Yogi to read this book and gain a lot from it, because the principles are universally true. These principles are not just true for Kriya Yogis, they're just part of the spiritual path and the spiritual life that we're all living. But Kriya Yogis also, I think, especially will have a much better understanding of how Kriya Yoga, Swami Kriyananda would often say, is a whole way of life. It's a whole approach to life and how we live life, and how we can apply what we learn from and gain with our practices, and just learn how to be better human beings. I think that's really, if someone were to ask what's the main benefit of Kriya Yoga and the most universal, it's that it makes people better human beings, and a better parent, a better teacher, a better friend, better artist, better whatever one is doing, but also just a kinder, more generous and content and happy and clear-minded person. And in the end, what it does really, I think, more than anything, is it helps us to become a cause rather than an effect, meaning that we're not bounced around by life, bounced around by the waves, but we learn how to be able to help others. Because I think everyone who comes to a place like this, they're wanting not only just to change themselves, but to help others and to help friends and family. Even if you're not consciously coming for that reason, I think people who want to change themselves just are the kind of people who want to do that. And Kriya Yoga, I think, more than anything, helps people to do that. And I can say this is universally true, because these practices are universal, based on our own human nature that everybody has. And I have to say, one of the blessings and joys of working with Kriya Yogis for many decades and helping and guiding thousands of Kriya Yogis is that I've gotten to see the truth that these things work guaranteed. It's just absolutely guaranteed that if you follow these things in the way that they're taught, people change and even become saints in the end. And this is why Yogananda said, I can take a few young men of the coarsest type, I can teach them Kriya Yoga, and in a few years they can become saints if they do it the way that I teach them. He said that's part of the catch. And that's part of the guarantee too, is anything that has 100% guaranteed. If a salesman says that, I always look at it, what's the catch? There has to be a catch. Nothing's perfect like that. The only catch is that we just have to do it and practice it, have that discipline. But I can say that every single person I've ever seen who has followed it in the right way, they've gotten these results without exception. So it works universally because we're all made the same way in the end. This is one of the things. I've traveled all over the world teaching these things. I've taught the Kriya teachings in Moscow and Italy and Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico, India, Canada, and other places I probably can't remember. People are the same. They're just wanting happiness and just the same pitfalls, the same desires and attachments and problems with just in the ways that we've been talking about. And the solution is also universally the same. So I think I'll open it up to questions, and Padma, Michael, and the others who might suggest anything I could also talk about, or if others have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll also talk about later just about my life in India and what we're doing with this monastery that Padma was talking about.
I have a question, not so much about the content, but about the process. How did you come about writing it, and what was it like writing it?
Okay.
And how did you get to publication?
What was it like writing the book in the process? That's a good question, because it was actually strangely enough, it was a really difficult book to write, because I could have covered it in so many different ways. And my mind and intellect, and this is where intuition is really, really important for me. And intuition, what that means is when the heart is really calm and the mind is still and we're more perceiving, because the heart it's like the brain. It's better than the brain, but it also can be much worse than the brain, because when the agitated feeling is there, it sees things really badly. I have a strong feeling I should do this, and it's an emotional feeling, it's not intuition. Yogananda defined intuition as calm feeling and perceiving. It's like a heart perception. And so I was approaching it like, okay, my mind was like, okay, how do I want to approach this book? And I tried it one way, I tried it another way, and I realized I couldn't write a 150-page brochure about Kriya Yoga for a random person. Other people can do that, but I finally understood that I had to share from just the depth of my experience in my 40 plus years of living this, and to share it from the deepest possible way, but also to make it accessible to someone who was just entering into this idea for the first time. And that was almost an impossible task to do. But I took some writing seclusions finally, and where I was just not dealing with any other things and just tuning in to the book with my intuition of how to write it. And the process was interesting because I did this a few times over the course of about a year and a half. And the flow was, I didn't have an outline, cover this, and this. I had general topic ideas, but as I started writing the book, the next chapter would intuitively flow into the next chapter. And so you see the chapters have a flow to them. And the flow of the book is also woven throughout the book is the art and the science being the technique and the philosophy, the art of the intuitive way that we live these things in all the ways I've been talking about. Because when we combine those two things, art and science, and you'll see I talk a lot about that in the book, that's how we really gain from life. And just like a musical instrument, when you learn all the techniques, all the fingering exercises and all these things, you also have to play with inspiration and with feeling, with deep feeling. And so a great master musician, their technique is flawless. And I remember seeing a musician whose technique was flawless, and he's a master player of the cello, a friend of mine from Ananda. And you can see he still does the finger exercises, but he's done them so well that he's no longer just focusing on the technique. His fingers are just naturally, he has pranayama over his fingers, finger yam, the fingers. And so he's just able to express beautiful, inspired music. And another musician told me that their teacher once told them, don't let bad technique get in the way of inspired and good music. And so a Kriya Yogi, our spine, our lives, it's like a musical instrument. And so we have to work with both. And so I realized that I couldn't just work with my intellect and trying to figure this out. And so for me, it was like playing inspired music, writing the book. It just, the inspiration and the flow, kind of worked itself out. And it took me a few years, but also I really needed to condense it into what was really important, because a lot of Kriya yogis, they get too technical and too philosophical and then very mental about the technique, about the practices, and their heads start spinning and they never get away from the technique. They just are focused on the technique and think it's only about a technique. And I start the book with the introduction where Yogananda was chided by a friend, teacher, as he was a young boy, young Mukunda, and was a saint, the levitating saint, an autobiography of the yogi. And Yogananda would meditate with him, young Mukunda. And the saint, they were meditating one day, and after a couple hours of sitting in the meditation, they came out, and the saint chided young Mukunda. He said, "You all go often into the silence, but are you practicing and experiencing anubhav?" Anubhav means the direct experience of God, the direct perception of God. You will go often into the silence, but are you experiencing divine communion? Inner communion is what we would also call it. He said, don't mistake the technique for the goal. And so a lot of Kriya yogis, they forget about the goal because they just get so caught up in all the esoterica and the minutiae of the technique. But we're expressing music of life and of our hearts. And so I had to kind of go off into that more deeply, that expression of the art, when I was writing the book. And so it's not necessarily a logical flow, but then when you read it from that sense of more intuitive flow of a piece of music, yeah, and you'll see the chapters that really flow one into the other because of that, much more than if I had come up with a rational, technical outline of how to present those things. And it took me probably 4 or 5 years to finally figure that out. And it took some time just sitting with it and just trying to tune into it, because I was asked by Jyotish and Devi, the leaders of Ananda, to write this book. But they didn't tell me, they didn't give me the chapter outline at all. And I had to figure it out, and it took me surprisingly a long time. And I think part of it was just to try. This is something I also learned, is that when you're trying to find an answer to something, don't just sit and wait for God to tell you what to do, because it's probably not going to happen. You actually have to start trying, even if you don't get it right. You have to start putting out energy, and it's while you're putting out the energy and you're in that flow of energy that you all of a sudden realize, okay, this is where I need to be going with it and the direction I need to take. Because energy, this energy that we're talking about, is intelligent. It's divinely intelligent. And if we tune into that flow of energy and work with that energy, the answer comes in that flow. I shared this idea once many decades ago at Ananda Village at a Sunday service that we had. And I shared that basic idea, and this very elderly woman came up to me afterwards, and she had a very rich, deep, sort of southern folk accent, like West Virginia or something. Just very charming and delightful lady, not someone you'd expect to be a yogi, but she was. But afterwards she came to me and said, that's exactly what my grandpappy used to say. He said, you can't steer a parked car. And I was trying to steer the parked car. We just sit, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And you just wait for God to lay on you and inspire you. And we have to actually start moving, even if we don't know exactly where we're going. We just have to try. But if we do it in the right way, with the right, trying to tune into the flow of energy, and the process is kind of like this, and maybe I'll just describe how we found land and the direction for our monastery. Because, I was asked also to help kind of restart and reboot a monastery in India for Indian monks. Because it had sort of, come up and crashed and failed monasteries, and I couldn't fully understand how to do it. But yeah, it was the same thing, trying, putting out energy. And I came across something that Swami Kriyananda wrote that he wanted Ananda to do with the monastery when the timing was right. And that document that he wrote, nobody even knew about it, and I just sort of came across it because I was trying. I was putting out energy. But then it came time, right in the middle of the pandemic, it was clear that this new way worked, but that to really take it all the way, we needed to have our own space, our own land, our own buildings. And how we did that, how we would do that in the middle of the pandemic without any money in India, just vast country, where should we do it? And where we were, which was more in the central western part of India, wasn't the right place for it, just for too many reasons I won't get into. But we prayed, we meditated on, okay, where should we go to do this? And an answer came, in meditation through a couple of friends, but we weren't presumptuous about it, because you can't just say, this is God speaking, and run headlong into it, because you might run into the wall when you find out that God was trying to tell you that, yeah, go here, but then turn left, and you went straight. And so the process was listening and meditating and tuning in, acting on what we were feeling, but not being presumptuous, taking a step, and after taking a step, did it work? My quicksand is the universe supporting me, listening again, meditating, asking, taking another step. And so with that process, we ended up moving to a completely different part of India where Ananda hadn't had a real strong presence. We found some really amazingly good land that had 400 gallons a minute of water when we drilled a well in just a really rich agricultural place, but right up against the Himalaya mountains. I mean, just a kilometer away from this farm-like land, the mountains start, the hills start. And land in India is extraordinarily expensive. I mean, it's way more expensive than California land. And the reason is because the population density is 12 times what we have here, because it's 3 times less size of a country and 4 times as many people. And so imagine for every person that you see, there's 12 everywhere you go. You're on the highway right now. There's 12 times as many cars and 12 times as many people, because that's the intensity of India. You see it very real. So land is very scarce. We didn't have a penny to buy land. We just I wouldn't recommend this. I mean, it's not and I've never done this before either, but for some reason it just, and again, it was taking a step at a time. And this land, we looked about 30 or 40 parcels of land and just met a lot of dishonest land brokers. Just nothing was right. And finally there was a parcel of land and everything was right about it. The person who was working with selling the land, and our neighbors who were amazing people who were doing permaculture farming, which you never find in India. And very interestingly, the name of these neighbors, sounds like a coincidence, but they're not part of Ananda Sangha. They're not disciples of Yogananda. But 12 years ago, when they bought this land, they wanted the name to express joy and happiness of their farm. So they call it Ananda Permaculture Farm, of all things. And this is the people we came across. And the very funny thing is that when they got the name, they went to look for the domain name, ananda.org and ananda.com. Someone else already had it. And funnily enough, that was me and my wife Maria were the ones who were managing the Ananda website for all those years. And so they added 2 A's to the extra A's, AA, NANDAA.org and .com. And they're very dear friends and they're helping us. But this land was even more expensive than we thought. And again, we didn't have a penny to buy it. And people would think you're crazy, and some people, well, we were actually. But I put the word out because I thought, okay, you've led us this far. You're not leading us this far just to trick us and just pull the rug out from under us, are you? So we put the word out, and in 3 days, someone who had heard about it just secondhand, emailed me and said, tell me about this and tell me what you want to build. And I said, yeah, this is what it is, and this is. Believe it or not, land there, really good land. It's about 30 minutes from the city. It's about $100,000 an acre. That's how expensive it is. Wow. And that's pretty normal and common. And I put the word out, and this person emailed, said, describe what you're doing. And I said, yeah, this is what we want to do, and this is what we want to build. And she said, I can cover all of that. And it was like, we have 5.5 acres of land, and some of it was less than the land had gone up to that price now. We still need the money to build, but so I'm working on that, and hopefully the universe is. But we have 5.5 acres of really, really good land that is legally really great because there's a lot of shady land deals in India where you buy land and the neighbor comes out and says, oh, I own that donut in the very middle of your place, which has happened to Ananda over there. So this is all really certified and everything, and we have great neighbors. We have amazing support of the local people with the local villages. It's really much higher-minded region than anything I've even seen over there. And so this is working with intuition and steering the parked car, and again, stepping, listening, okay, is this still right? Going with some faith, and it's not blind faith because, so far every step we've taken, you seem to be supporting us, and it seems to be the right steps and decisions. And so faith, faith is, there's some reality to faith based on experience and trust, but you also can't be presumptuous. And Swami Kriyananda taught us this. I mean, he would have an intuition, and we learned to really trust his intuition. And he would have an intuition for something, and he wouldn't just be presumptuous and say, I had this flash of inspiration, and I feel, you wouldn't hear people say, I feel, we should just say, that emotional I feel is like, okay, I'm not so sure that this is divine feeling. So he would never do that. But he would always go to friends and say, well, what do you think about this idea? And when people heard him say that, they learned to, let's trust him with this and let's try it. Because he was right. Not all the time, but inevitably it seemed like he was in the important ways. So this is how we work with intuition in our lives, and this is for everybody in our own lives. And it's learning to trust people, but using our intuition, because I think we've all been fooled by people who we trusted and we thought they were reliable, and so you have to learn trial and error. But when the emotions again, the agitated feeling of the heart is calm, you're not just having wishful thinking, and the emotions are not all caught up in it. Then you see more clearly, and you can intuitively, see who you can trust and what is the right thing to do and what's the right action in our lives. And so that describes the path of Kriya Yoga again in many ways. And so maybe I'll just finish talking about the monastery and then more questions. But we have 5.5 acres of land now. We may be getting a little bit more than that, and it's just beautiful land, and we, an architectural firm, the founder of this firm that has 105 employees, it's just a big leading firm in Delhi. He heard about our project, and he also is a Kriya Yogi, and brilliant architect and designer. And he said, so let me know how I can help you. So we told him what we were doing, and now this firm is doing the design, the architecture. We're working with a site plan right now. And no matter how hard we try, they refuse to accept any money from us to pay for this work. And we'll pay for any engineering work that's done and things like that. But they keep saying, no, we don't want to accept any money for this. And we're working with the government right now also. We're in the very final stages of getting a zoning change to legally build 20 buildings on there for a lot of monks. So that's the process we're in right now. And just prayers would be good to get us across the finish line with those permissions and just to get the rest of the support to build a place like that. But we have 10 monks of us living over there. We're getting the best young Indian men right now. They're just really, really brilliant, really selfless, really dedicated, committed, harmonious, just because you need harmony to do something like that. And just, so there's also that, I think in some way, that's why the time is right for this, is that these young guys are coming. They're all brilliant people, college educated. 2 of them are graduates of IIT, which are like the leading, institute of colleges. There's like Ivy League type colleges in India, and we have a whole online work that we're doing because we're not going there to be farmers, tractors and pitchforks. We're going there to have a sustainable place using permaculture methods. We're going to be doing rammed earth buildings using natural earth principles for that, but a refined way of living these expressions of these teachings. And during the pandemic, just the year before the pandemic, we started working with these guys to do online classes. And so for about a year, we really started developing our initial online teaching and classes. And so when the pandemic hit, and this again, I think is cooperating with grace. We just somehow were led to be doing online classes, and as the next step for the way that we could serve without getting caught up in all the, monks getting caught up in all, because the monks need some protection, from all the worldly restlessness and the draws that are there. And so we were doing that for a year, and then all of a sudden the lockdown and the pandemic came, and it was like, then we just started really taking off with that, and these guys are brilliant and able to do it. And so we'll continue to do that when we live, when we start building the first buildings out there. And we also will, be growing food and just living a lifestyle that's in harmony with nature. And so the name of the place is called Guru Kripa Forest Hermitage. The forest will be trees that we plant, and we're already starting to do that. Mango trees, lychee, guava, but also a lot of native trees to create a forest environment. And trees grow really, really fast in India. If you want to see how fast, Google or go to YouTube for Ananda permaculture, AANANDAA permaculture. And one of their videos has like 1.5 million views, because these people are teachers all over India of permaculture, and especially in that climate, and they are 0.5 kilometer away on a dirt road from us, and just very dear friends and neighbors. And so I think what I've seen is that when you are selfless and just wanting to help others and give to others, the universe, God, other people like to support those kinds of things. And I think we see this when we see someone who's really selfless and giving of themselves, we want to help them. And when we see someone who's just greedy and self-involved, maybe there's not as much of a tendency to want to help them. So this is the process, and this is, the life of a Kriya Yogi in many ways, of those who are really living it, but it's for everybody, it's not just for monks. Yogananda talked about this, and the book talks about this too, how to apply it in the life of a householder, raising a family and having a business, because it is for everybody. So that's a very long answer to
Just quickly, there are we come across some people who say, okay, Kriya Yoga sounds great. I don't think it's for me. Is Kriya for everybody?
That's a good question. I think the principles are for everybody. But the only way to find out if it is for you is to just come take a meditation class, with Ananda, and just try it out and see. And maybe it isn't for everybody. Not everyone is in the right time in their evolution where this is what they need next. And maybe there's another approach that might be helpful for them rather than this one, using similar principles. But the answer is just try it out, come to a meditation class. Yogananda, I think, once said that if people came to him for his teachings and they weren't the right ones for that person, just by starting to learn them and practice them, the energy would start to be awakened, the agitated feelings of the heart, he didn't put it this way, but I am, would be calmed, and the mind would become more clear. And then they would start to see what is the right path for them to go to. It's not like gurus are competing with each other for people. It's just they're trying to help people. But just simply by learning the very basics of meditation, that's at the first classes that you do here and that we do with Ananda, it will help people take their next step if this isn't fully it. But the only way to find out how do you do it, you can't steer apart a car. You have to turn on the engine and start, which way should I go? Any other questions, or am I missing anything?
Can you influence your family?
You can, and influence, that word is a little bit tricky.
It's probably a bad word.
Course our family can,
And? I guess I mean, like,
energetically.
Yes, but the answer is yes. I can say how, which is that it's, magnetism, again, the book has a whole chapter on magnetism, because magnetism is a huge part of working with energy. When there is a strong flow of energy, there's a strong magnetism. In a person, in an electrical motor, an electromagnet. So the stronger the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. And the reason why a great master or a saint, they're so magnetic. People would see Yogananda on the street and would just come to him and just, who are you? You're the most beautiful person I've ever seen, even as a human being. his human magnetism, just his kindness and everything, just people were really drawn to it. And so magnetism is very powerful science and energy in the universe. And so we can change people, especially through our magnetism and who we are and who we become. And I've seen this with people who are even negative about these practices because their spouse comes and learns meditation and they're really negative, they're afraid, but then they start seeing how it's changing and how the person learning Kriya Yoga is becoming a better human being. And so they start to be more open to the idea, at least. But we also, our magnetism becomes stronger. And a strong magnet influences a weak magnet. And when a strong negative magnetism in a family is there, and our magnetism and energy is not strong, it will influence us and get us all upset and angry and emotional and pull us down. And so when our magnetism is strong, then we can influence people in a really good way and not in a manipulative way, just by who we are and who we're becoming. And you might even, your family might even be interested in learning some of these things. And I've seen that happen a lot. One story, I think I even shared it in here, but it's repeated many times in my life, where there was a man who is in the Indian military, where we live, and he came to learn Kriya Yoga. And he's a commando, and he trains people in the military in just really intense ways. So he's a really strong person. He came to learn Kriya Yoga, and his wife freaked out because in India there's sort of this idea that in order to find God and be a yogi, you have to become a Baba and go off into the Himalayas and grow matted hair and leave your family, abandon your family and live in a cave. And people do that. So she was really afraid that he was going to do this because they had 2 children and she was freaking out. And so he came and learned meditation, and she came to me finally after about 6 months or a year. And she was standing there with her husband right there. And she was telling me that she wanted to learn these things because she said, my husband, he's a lot calmer now. He doesn't get angry as much. And he was right there standing. And he was just smiling so sweetly. He's not a weak man. I mean, he's just a powerful person. He's not big. He's actually kind of small, but he's very powerful. And he just smiled sweetly and supportively. And she became a Kriya Yogi. She learned meditation and Kriya Yoga. Doesn't mean your family members will, but the influence can be there. And again, Kriya helps increase our magnetism, our energy, and help us to become a cause rather than an effect. And it's not by preaching to our family or anything like that. It's just, you see this in Indian families a lot. There's families that have a really good energy. Very often there's some wise, saintly aunt or grandparent that people think she's a little crazy and she goes and prays a lot and, is a very quiet and inward, but very often you see that influence in good families from just one person who has that kind of magnetism that's not always so obvious. Questions?
I have another question about the book. The process, it sounds like it was a very intuitive process in addition to obviously putting in the effort. And was there a point, I'm working on a manuscript right now, so I'm kind of also just interested from was there a point, did you intuitively just say, I'll get done when it gets done? Yeah. Or was it like putting like a artificial time frame?
I couldn't rush it.
Yeah.
And I tried, and I had a lot of pressure from other people saying, we need this 2 years, 3 years. And, I had to actually spend time just trying and just sitting with it.
Yeah.
But then when the full understanding came of how to do it, or just overall, generally, then at that point, it was just sitting down and writing over the course of a few months. And then it just came and flowed. But it took, many, many months of coming to that point of, inwardly and calmly understanding with intuition how I was going to approach it. It took a few years, really, in the end, just to reach that point.
And did you have just an intuitive sense that this project thing is not good, but it feels like it's reached the point
Yeah,
to share it.
yeah. So when I did that part, it was really clear and obvious.
Okay.
For me, it was real obvious. It was like, when the last chapter was done, there were no more chapters. There's no more ideas.
Just
And it's only like 17 chapters or 18 or something. It's not a long book. And part of the process of taking longer was to really focus it and even condense it. And Swami Kriyananda, who was a great writer, and he would quote an author, a well-known author, English author I think it was, who wrote a letter to a friend. And it was a long letter. And at the end of the letter she said, if I'd had more time, this letter would have been shorter. It just, sometimes when you rush something, you just start throwing all your thoughts out there, and whatever sticks, and it becomes too long. So I really felt the need to really be focused, because I think a lot of Kriya yogis lose the forest for the trees by all the details and all the philosophy, and you don't know what to focus on anymore.
And how did you it's like almost like it's like you trust, right? Like it's over and then not being attached. Is that like how is that a quieting of the heart to get to that space?
Yeah, but I think it's just we in India for yogis, and part of our life is karma yoga. When people think karma yoga is getting good karma, I do something, I get good karma, but it's actually acting without being attached to the fruits of the action. And it doesn't mean being indifferent and sloppy about it, but it means putting out all the energy you can. But when it's done and given, then it's not yours anymore. And that's how I feel about this book, that once it was passed on to the editor, because there was some editing done, but I almost feel like it wasn't my book anymore. And it never was, in a way. It was just, I was needed to work with this process, and once I've given it to God, and I talk about it like it's my book, but I just feel like, and for me also, I really prayed to Yogananda, Swami Kriyananda, how do you want me to write this book? So in some ways I feel like this is their book, but it needed my life experiences and other understandings to express it in a way that would reach people here and now. But yeah, there was a sense of completion and giving it and not being mine at that point. But I had to bring it to that point, of course.
Is that just the work, because as you're working through it, right?
Yeah.
You're writing
and putting everything into it. Everything. I mean, just a lot of tapasya, as they call it in India, to make it happen, which is, I don't know. I read about it. Someone who was asked how you write a daily column every day for the newspaper. He says it's easy. I just sit down at my typewriter, and when blood starts sweating out of my forehead, then I'm able to start writing it. But you were saying it just takes some suffering sometimes just to reach that point, and it did for me actually in some ways. I had to go through some just physical challenges while I was in the very middle of writing it, and finally having a window to take seclusion. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of intense focus, concentration. It's not just dancing through the flower garden kind of intuitive flow for me. It also was a lot of hard work at it. So, but then to let go of it from that, yeah, that's not something that most people have an easy time doing, I don't think. But I think just from living a life of meditation and Kriya Yoga and just, I don't know, giving everything to God. And this is what I found also is that, Yogananda said, give your faults to God and just blame God, but people want to hold on to the good stuff and take credit for it. And you can't do it just one or the other. But if you give everything to God throughout your life, and just every good thing you do and give it to God and to others and your faults, and then you're not pulled down by, oh, I really screwed up really badly, or I'm really great because I wrote a great book, or it doesn't affect one. And there's an inner freedom in action after when you reach that point, but that takes practice too. Because we make mistakes and we have regrets, and Kriya Yoga helps us learn how to offer those up and let go of those, and also not be attached to the praise and the glory and the ego stuff that comes with it, and that's an art also. Any other questions? Okay. Well, it's always a joy to share these teachings and really how to live and how to, again, be a better human being, because we're all trying to do that.
So we have a little time. I think we will be signing books for us.
I'm happy to sign books.
Okay, we have a little space at the front, and we have some
refreshments out there, all
Yes,
kinds
yeah.
of refreshments.